In the harsh Texas plains of 1867, where trust between settlers and Native Americans was as rare as water in the desert, one moment of human compassion would change everything. What happened when rancher Thomas McKenna pulled a drowning Comanche boy from deadly quicksand would shatter every belief he held about his enemies, and, 3 days later, when hundreds of warriors appeared on his horizon, he would discover that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting, but choosing to save a life that others would have let perish. This is the true story of how one desperate rescue created an unbreakable bond between two worlds at war, proving that humanity knows no boundaries when a child's life hangs in the balance. Thomas McKenna wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse through the mesquite brush along Willow Creek. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on this September afternoon in 1867, and the drought had turned most of the landscape into a parched wasteland. His cattle needed water, and this creek was one of the few reliable sources left in Brazos County. At 42 years old, Thomas had survived the Civil War, Indian raids, and the challenges of building a ranch from nothing. His weathered hands told the story of countless hours mending fences, birthing calves, and defending his land. The McKenna Ranch stretched across 3,000 acres of what many considered the most dangerous territory in Texas. Comanche war parties still roamed these plains, and most settlers lived in constant fear. Thomas had different reasons for his caution. He had fought alongside men of all colors during the war and learned that courage and honor weren't determined by the color of a man's skin. Still, the recent attacks on neighboring homesteads kept him alert. 3 families had been killed just last month, and the cavalry patrols from Fort Richardson offered little comfort to isolated ranchers like himself. As he approached the creek bend, Thomas heard something that made him pull up short. It wasn't the usual sounds of water flowing over rocks or birds calling from the cottonwood trees. This was human, a desperate, gasping cry for help. He urged his horse forward, pushing through the thick brush until he could see the creek clearly. What he saw made his blood run cold. About 50 yards downstream, where the creek made a sharp turn, a young boy was trapped in quicksand. The child couldn't have been more than 12 years old, and he was sinking fast. Only his head and shoulders remained above the deadly mixture of sand and water that had claimed so many unwary travelers. But this wasn't just any boy. Even from a distance, Thomas could see the distinctive clothing and long black hair that marked him as Comanche. The boy's desperate struggles were only making him sink faster, and panic filled his dark eyes as he spotted Thomas on horseback. For a moment, Thomas hesitated. Everything he had been taught about survival on the frontier told him to ride away. This could be a trap. Comanche warriors were known for their cunning, and using a child as bait wasn't beyond their tactics. But, as he watched the boy's terrified face disappear another inch into the quicksand, Thomas knew he couldn't live with himself if he rode away. He dismounted quickly and grabbed the rope from his saddle. The quicksand was in a depression where an underground spring met the creek, creating the perfect deadly trap. Thomas had lost a calf to this same spot 2 years earlier and knew how quickly it could claim a life. "Hold still," he shouted to the boy, not sure if the child understood English but hoping his tone would convey the message. "Stop fighting it." The boy's eyes widened as Thomas approached, but desperation overcame fear. Thomas could see the intelligence in those dark eyes, the understanding that this stranger represented his only chance of survival. Thomas tested the ground carefully as he approached. The solid earth ended about 10 feet from where the boy was trapped. He would have to use his rope, but getting the angle right would be crucial. Too much force and he might pull the boy apart. Too little and the suction of the quicksand would win. He formed a loop and threw it toward the boy. His first attempt fell short. The second landed near the boy's head, but the child was too panicked to grab it properly. Thomas took a deep breath, knowing that time was running out. The boy had sunk to his chest now, and soon it would be too late. "Listen to me," Thomas called out, his voice firm but calm. "You have to trust me. When this rope comes to you, put it under your arms. Don't grab it with your hands. Under your arms. Do you understand? The boy nodded slightly, and Thomas saw a flicker of hope replace some of the terror in his expression. This time, Thomas's throw was perfect. The loop landed right in front of the boy, who managed to work it under his arms despite the quicksand's grip. Thomas wrapped his end of the rope around a sturdy cottonwood and began to pull. The suction was incredible, like trying to extract a cork from a bottle that didn't want to give up its prize. The boy cried out in pain as the rope cut into his chest, but Thomas knew this was the only way. Inch by agonizing inch, the boy began to rise from the deadly trap. Thomas's muscles strained against the rope, his boots digging into the soft earth by the creek bank. Sweat poured down his face as he fought against the quicksand's relentless grip. Just when Thomas thought his strength might give out, the suction suddenly released. The boy shot upward so quickly that Thomas stumbled backward, but he managed to keep the rope taut as the child swung toward solid ground. The boy collapsed on the creek bank, gasping and covered in mud, but alive. Thomas quickly pulled him further from the water's edge, then knelt beside the exhausted child to check for injuries. The boy's breathing was labored, and his skin was pale from shock, but he appeared to be unharmed. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Thomas offered water from his canteen, which the boy accepted gratefully. As the child's breathing returned to normal, Thomas got his first good look at his face. Despite the mud and exhaustion, there was something regal about the boy's features. His clothing, though simple, was well made and decorated with intricate beadwork that suggested high status within his tribe. The boy said something in Comanche, gesturing toward Thomas with obvious gratitude. Though Thomas didn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. He had just saved this child's life, and the boy would not forget it. Thomas helped the boy to his feet and pointed toward his horse. The child was still weak from his ordeal and would need assistance getting anywhere safely. But, as they approached the horse, Thomas heard something that made his blood freeze, the sound of hoofbeats approaching fast through the brush. Within seconds, a dozen Comanche warriors emerged from the mesquite, their painted faces fierce and their weapons ready. Thomas instinctively moved to put himself between the boy and the warriors, his hand moving toward his pistol. But the boy quickly stepped forward and began speaking rapidly in his native language. The lead warrior, a man of perhaps 50 with silver streaking his long black hair, dismounted and approached them. His eyes moved from the muddy, exhausted boy to Thomas, taking in the scene with the sharp intelligence of an experienced leader. The boy continued talking, gesturing toward the quicksand and, then, toward Thomas, his voice growing stronger as he told his story. Thomas watched the warrior's face carefully, trying to read his intentions. The man's expression was unreadable, but Thomas noticed that he hadn't given any signals for the other warriors to attack. That had to be a good sign. Finally, the boy finished his account. The lead warrior studied Thomas for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes seeming to look straight into his soul. Then, to Thomas's amazement, the warrior approached him and placed his hand over his own heart, then gestured toward Thomas. "He says his name is Chief Running Bear," the boy said in heavily accented but clear English, surprising Thomas. "He says you have saved his son's life, and, for this, you will always be a friend to the Comanche people." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and awe wash over him. The boy he had saved wasn't just any child, he was the son of a Comanche chief. And, apparently, the rescue had just changed his relationship with one of the most feared tribes on the Texas frontier. Chief Running Bear spoke again, and the boy translated. "My father says that our people have a saying, a life saved in honor must be repaid with honor. He wants to know what you would ask of us in return for what you have done today." Thomas thought carefully before responding. He could ask for safe passage for his cattle, or protection for his ranch, or any number of things that would benefit him personally. But, something about the chief's dignified bearing and the trust in the boy's eyes made him choose differently. "Tell your father that seeing you alive and safe with your family is payment enough," Thomas said. "A child's life has value beyond anything I could ask for." The boy translated, and Thomas saw something shift in Chief Running Bear's expression. The stern warrior's face softened slightly, and he nodded slowly. He spoke again, this time at some length. "My father says you have the heart of a true warrior," the boy translated. "He says that what you have done today will not be forgotten by our people. But, he also says that accepting no reward would dishonor the debt we owe you. In 3 days, we will return to show you the respect you have earned." Before Thomas could ask what that meant, the warriors had helped the boy onto one of their horses. Chief Running Bear mounted his own horse and raised his hand in what Thomas recognized as a gesture of farewell and respect. As quickly as they had appeared, the Comanche war party disappeared into the brush, leaving Thomas alone by the creek with only the disturbed mud around the quicksand as proof that the encounter had really happened. Thomas stood there for several minutes, trying to process what had just occurred. He had saved a child's life, that much was clear. But, he had also apparently earned the respect of one of the most powerful Comanche chiefs in Texas. The question now was what Chief Running Bear meant when he said they would return in 3 days to show him respect. As Thomas mounted his horse and headed back toward his ranch, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The rescue at the creek had been instinctive, any decent human being would have done the same thing. But, somehow, he had the feeling that the consequences of his actions would reach far beyond anything he could imagine. The ride back to his ranch gave Thomas time to think about what he would tell his wife, Sarah, and their teenage daughter, Mary. Sarah had always supported his belief that judging people by their race or culture was wrong, but she also worried constantly about the safety of their family. The recent Indian raids had made everyone in the county nervous, and the presence of Comanche warriors so close to their home would likely terrify her. But, Thomas also knew that what had happened today was bigger than his own family's fears. He had looked into the eyes of Chief Running Bear and seen not a savage enemy, but a father grateful for his son's life. The chief's dignity and the boy's courage had shown him that the Comanche people were more than the wild raiders portrayed in the local newspapers. As the sun began to set behind him, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Thomas McKenna rode toward home with a strange mixture of anticipation and concern. In 3 days, he would discover exactly what it meant to have earned the respect of a Comanche chief. Whatever happened, he knew that this September afternoon by Willow Creek would mark a turning point in his life, and possibly in the troubled relationship between his people and the Comanche nation. The boy he had saved was more than just a chief's son, Thomas realized. He was a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for too long. And, somehow, through a simple act of human compassion, Thomas had become part of that bridge. Now he could only wait to see where it would lead him. Thomas McKenna rode into his ranch yard just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the western hills. The familiar sight of his 2-story wooden house, with smoke curling from the chimney and warm yellow light glowing in the windows, normally brought him comfort after a long day. Tonight, however, he felt the weight of the day's events pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. Sarah appeared on the front porch before he had even dismounted. After 20 years of marriage, she could read his moods better than anyone, and something in his posture must have told her that this had been no ordinary day checking on the cattle. "You're later than usual," she called out, wiping her hands on her apron. "Supper's been keeping warm for near an hour." Thomas secured his horse in the barn, taking extra time with the grooming as he gathered his thoughts. How exactly did a man tell his wife that he had just saved the life of a Comanche chief's son and that the entire tribe was planning to return in 3 days to show their respect? Sarah was a strong woman who had endured the hardships of frontier life without complaint, but this news would test even her considerable courage. When he finally entered the house, the familiar smells of cornbread and beef stew filled his nostrils. Their daughter Mary looked up from her schoolbooks at the kitchen table, her 16-year-old face bright with curiosity. "Papa, you look like you've seen a ghost," she said, studying his expression with the directness that reminded him so much of her mother. "Did something happen with the cattle?" Sarah set a plate of food in front of him, but, instead of eating, Thomas pushed it aside and gestured for both women to sit down. The seriousness of his expression immediately captured their attention. "I need to tell you both about something that happened today," he began, choosing his words carefully. "Something that's going to affect all of us." For the next half hour, Thomas recounted the events at Willow Creek. He described finding the boy trapped in the quicksand, the desperate rescue, and the arrival of Chief Running Bear and his warriors. He told them about the chief's promise to return in 3 days, though he admitted he wasn't entirely sure what that meant. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing paler with each detail. When Thomas finished his account, she stood up abruptly and began pacing the small kitchen. "Thomas McKenna, do you realize what you've done?" she said, her voice tight with worry. "You've drawn the attention of the most dangerous Comanche war chief in this part of Texas. What if this is all some elaborate trap? What if they're planning to use your kindness against you?" Mary, however, had a different reaction. "Papa, you saved a child's life," she said firmly. "That boy would have died if you hadn't helped him. How could that be wrong?" Thomas reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "Your mother's not saying it was wrong, Mary. She's worried about what might happen next, and she has every right to be." Sarah stopped pacing and looked directly at her husband. "Thomas, I've stood by you through droughts, floods, cattle rustlers, and every other hardship this land has thrown at us. But this is different. The Jenkinsons were killed just last month, not 20 miles from here. The Comanche don't distinguish between good white folks and bad ones when they're on the warpath. But this chief seemed different," Thomas said. "The way he looked at me, the respect he showed, I think we might be dealing with something unprecedented here." Sarah sank back into her chair, exhaustion replacing anger in her voice. "What exactly are we supposed to do? Just wait here for 3 days and hope that when a war party shows up on our doorstep, they're coming in peace?" "That's exactly what we're going to do," Thomas said quietly. "We're going to trust that saving a child's life means something to these people. We're going to believe that honor exists among all peoples, not just our own." The next morning brought no relief from the tension that had settled over the McKenna household. Sarah had barely slept, and every sound from outside sent her hurrying to the window. Thomas tried to maintain his normal routine, checking on the cattle and repairing a section of fence that had been damaged in the recent storms, but his mind kept returning to the creek and the promise Chief Running Bear had made. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the county, as news always did in sparsely settled country. By afternoon, 3 neighboring ranchers had ridden over to discuss what they saw as an impending threat to the entire area. Jake Morrison, whose spread bordered the McKenna ranch to the south, was the most vocal in his opposition to Thomas's decision to wait peacefully for the Comanche return. "Tom, you've got to see reason," Morrison argued as the men gathered around the kitchen table. "Chief Running Bear might have seemed friendly yesterday, but leopards don't change their spots. When those warriors show up, they'll be looking for weakness. You've shown them where you live, shown them that you're willing to help their people. In their minds, that makes you either a fool or a potential ally they can exploit." Bill Henderson, an older rancher who had lost 2 sons in Indian raids 5 years earlier, was even more direct. "Thomas, I respect what you did for that boy, I truly do. But you've put all of our families at risk. If Running Bear's war party decides to use your ranch as a base for raids on the rest of us, that boy's life won't seem worth much." The third man, David Cooper, had remained quiet during most of the discussion, but now he leaned forward with a suggestion that made Thomas's blood run cold. "There's still time to get word to Fort Richardson," Cooper said. "Captain Williams has 2 companies of cavalry there. They could be here by tomorrow night, hidden and ready if this Indian visit turns ugly. Nobody has to get hurt, but we'd have protection if things go wrong. Thomas stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly across the wooden floor. Absolutely not, he said firmly. I gave my word to a man who was grateful for his son's life. I'm not going to repay that trust by setting a military ambush. Your word? Morrison's voice rose in frustration. Tom, you're talking about savages who've been killing and scalping white folks for decades. Your word to them doesn't mean anything if you and your family end up dead. Those savages included a father who was grateful that someone saved his child, Thomas replied. If you can't understand that kind of feeling, then you're the one who's lost his humanity, not them. The argument continued for another hour, growing more heated as each man defended his position. Finally, the three neighbors left, but not before making it clear that they would be watching the McKenna ranch carefully over the next 2 days. If they saw any sign of trouble, they would take action regardless of Thomas's wishes. That evening, as the family sat around their dinner table in tense silence, Mary finally spoke up with a question that had been bothering her all day. Papa, what if those men are right? What if Chief Running Bear is planning to hurt us? Would you still feel good about saving his son? Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. Mary, there are moments in life when you have to choose between doing what's right and doing what's safe. Sometimes you can do both, but sometimes you can't. When I saw that boy drowning in the quicksand, I had to choose. I could save his life, or I could protect myself from possible consequences. I chose to save him, and I'd make the same choice again. But what about us? Sarah asked quietly. Don't you think you should have considered what might happen to your wife and daughter? Thomas reached across the table and took both women's hands in his. Every decision I make considers both of you. But I also have to live with myself, and I have to show my daughter what kind of man her father is. If I had let that boy die because I was afraid of his people, what would that have taught you about courage and compassion? Mary squeezed her father's hand. I think you did the right thing, Papa. I just hope Chief Running Bear feels the same way about keeping promises as you do. The second day brought a steady stream of visitors, some curious, some worried, and some openly hostile to Thomas's decision to wait peacefully for the Comanche return. Sheriff Tom Watson rode out from Brazos City to get first-hand information about the situation, bringing with him news that Thomas found disturbing. There's talk in town about organizing a militia, Watson reported as he accepted a cup of coffee from Sarah. Some folks are saying you've compromised the safety of the entire county by helping that Indian boy. They want to be ready to fight if Chief Running Bear's visit turns into a raid. Thomas felt a surge of frustration. Sheriff, I saved a drowning child. How has that become a threat to anyone? I'm not saying it is, Watson replied carefully. But you have to understand how people are feeling. The memory of the Jenkinson massacre is still fresh in everyone's minds. When word gets out that you've had direct contact with Chief Running Bear, and that he's planning to return, folks get nervous. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to consider the possibility that you might be wrong about Chief Running Bear's intentions. And I'm asking you to think about accepting some help, just in case. Thomas walked to the window and looked out at the peaceful prairie that stretched toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Chief Running Bear and his warriors were preparing for their promised return. Thomas had to believe that the chief's words meant what they seemed to mean, that this would be a visit of respect and gratitude, not a prelude to violence. Sheriff, I appreciate your concern, but I'm going to see this through the way I started it, with trust and good faith. If I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But I won't betray a promise made to a grateful father. Watson finished his coffee and stood to leave. I hope you know what you're doing, Tom. For your family's sake, and for the sake of everyone in this county. That night, Thomas found himself unable to sleep. He stood on his front porch, listening to the sounds of the prairie night and thinking about the choice he had made. In less than 24 hours, he would discover whether his faith in human nature had been justified or whether he had made a terrible mistake that would endanger everyone he cared about. Sarah joined him on the porch, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the cool night air. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked softly. "No," Thomas replied without hesitation. "I'm nervous about what's going to happen, but I'm not having second thoughts about what I did or what I'm doing now." "I've been thinking about that boy," Sarah said. "About what it must have felt like to be trapped in that quicksand, knowing you were going to die. And, then, to see someone coming to help you, someone you had probably been taught to fear. That must have taken tremendous courage on his part too." Thomas put his arm around his wife's shoulders. "It did. And, it took courage for his father to approach me afterward instead of simply attacking. I think there's more to this story than just a rescue and a promise of gratitude." "What do you mean?" "I think Chief Running Bear is testing something. Maybe he's testing whether white men can be trusted to keep their word. Maybe he's testing whether peace is possible between our peoples. If I'm right, then, tomorrow might be about much more than just saying thank you for saving a boy's life." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering her husband's words. "And, if you're wrong?" Thomas looked out at the stars scattered across the vast Texas sky. "Then, tomorrow might be the last night we spend in this house. But, Sarah, I'd rather take that risk than live knowing I let a child die because I was afraid of his people." As they stood together on the porch, both of them aware that the next day would bring answers to questions that had been plaguing them for 2 days, Thomas McKenna felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He had made his choice based on his deepest beliefs about right and wrong, and now he would face the consequences with the same courage that had driven him to throw that rope to a drowning Comanche boy. Tomorrow, Chief Running Bear would return, and Thomas would discover whether saving a life had indeed created a bridge between two worlds or whether his faith in human decency had been tragically misplaced. The third dawn broke clear and still across the Texas prairie, with not even a whisper of wind to disturb the morning calm. Thomas McKenna had been awake since before sunrise, standing at his bedroom window and watching the eastern horizon gradually brighten from deep purple to pale gold. Today was the day Chief Running Bear had promised to return, and, despite his outward confidence, Thomas felt his heart beating faster than usual. Sarah had given up any pretense of normal routine. She moved restlessly through the house, checking and rechecking the rifles, ensuring that the ammunition was loaded and ready, and glancing out windows every few minutes as if she expected to see war-painted warriors emerging from the mesquite brush. Mary, surprising both her parents with her composure, had insisted on maintaining her usual morning schedule. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, and helped prepare breakfast as if this were any ordinary day. But Thomas noticed that she kept looking toward the creek road, the same direction from which Chief Running Bear and his son had departed 3 days earlier. "How do you think they'll come?" Mary asked as the family sat down to what might be their last peaceful breakfast. "Will there be many of them?" Thomas buttered a piece of cornbread, trying to keep his voice steady. "I don't know, honey. Chief Running Bear said they would return to show respect. That could mean anything from a small group to the entire tribe." "The entire tribe?" Sarah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "Thomas, you didn't tell me you thought the entire tribe might come here." "I don't know what to expect," Thomas admitted. "But Chief Running Bear is apparently an important leader among his people. If he's decided to make some kind of statement about what happened at the creek, he might want witnesses from his own tribe to see it." The morning passed with agonizing slowness. Thomas tried to keep busy by checking on his cattle and repairing a loose board on the barn door, but he found it impossible to concentrate on normal ranch work. Every sound from beyond the immediate vicinity of the house made him stop and listen intently. Around 10 o'clock, Jake Morrison and Bill Henderson rode into the yard, their horses lathered with sweat and their faces grim with determination. "Tom, we can see dust on the northern horizon," Morrison announced without preamble. "Looks like a considerable number of riders heading this way. We've got men positioned on the ridges with good fields of fire if this turns ugly." Thomas felt a flash of anger. "Jake, I told you yesterday that I don't want any interference. If Chief Running Bear sees armed men positioned around my property, he'll think I've betrayed his trust." "His trust?" Henderson's voice rose in disbelief. "Tom, there must be 50 or more riders coming this way. That's not a social visit, that's a war party." "You don't know that," Thomas replied firmly. "And, I'm not going to start shooting at people who might be coming in peace just because you're scared." Morrison leaned forward in his saddle, his face flushed with frustration. "Tom, we're trying to save your life and the lives of your family. When those Indians arrive, if they have peaceful intentions, then, no harm done. But, if they're planning trouble, we'll be ready to help you fight them off. And, if they see your men with rifles trained on them, what do you think their reaction will be?" Thomas demanded. "You'll turn a peaceful encounter into a massacre, and you'll have started it." Before Morrison could respond, Mary's voice called out from the front porch. "Papa, I think you need to see this." Thomas hurried to where his daughter stood pointing toward the north. In the distance, perhaps 2 miles away, he could see a cloud of dust moving steadily toward the ranch. Even at this distance, it was clear that a large number of riders were approaching. Sarah joined them on the porch, her face pale but determined. "How many do you think there are?" Thomas squinted against the morning sun, trying to make out details through the dust cloud. "I can't tell for sure, but Jake was right about one thing, there are a lot of them." Henderson had followed them to the porch, and, now he made one final appeal. "Tom, it's not too late to accept help. Those men I have positioned on the ridges are good shots and, they're well concealed. Chief Running Bear won't know they're there unless shooting starts." Thomas turned to face the older rancher directly. "Bill, I understand your concern, I really do. But, I'm asking you to trust my judgment on this. Take your men and, go home. If I'm wrong about Chief Running Bear's intentions, then, you can say I told you so at my funeral. But, give me the chance to be right." Henderson stared at him for a long moment, then, shook his head in resignation. "You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. I hope for your family's sake that it's the former." As Henderson and Morrison rode away to call off their hidden riflemen, Thomas gathered his wife and daughter for what he hoped would not be their final family conference. "I want you both to understand something," he said, his voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "In about an hour, we're going to find out whether my faith in human decency was justified. If Chief Running Bear and his people come in peace, then, we'll welcome them with the respect they deserve. If they come with hostile intentions, then, we'll face that together as a family." Sarah took his hand. "Thomas, I've been angry and frightened these past 3 days, but I want you to know that I'm proud of what you did at the creek. Whatever happens today, you acted from the best part of your nature." Mary hugged both her parents. "I'm not afraid," she said with the confidence of youth. "Papa saved that boy because it was the right thing to do. I believe that goodness is rewarded, and Chief Running Bear seems like a man who understands the value of goodness." As the dust cloud drew closer, Thomas could begin to make out individual riders. The sight took his breath away. There weren't just 50 Comanche warriors approaching his ranch, there appeared to be well over 100, possibly closer to 200. "It's the entire tribe." Thomas felt a mixture of awe and terror wash over him. Whatever Chief Running Bear had planned for today, it was clearly intended to be witnessed by his entire people. This was no simple expression of gratitude, this was a significant tribal event. As the massive group of riders approached to within a few hundred yards of the house, Thomas could see Chief Running Bear at the front, easily recognizable by his proud bearing and the eagle feathers in his long black hair. Beside him rode the boy Thomas had saved, now clean and dressed in ceremonial clothing that marked him as someone of great importance within the tribe. The entire group came to a halt about 200 yards from the house, spreading out in a great semicircle that seemed to encompass the entire ranch yard. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying. Hundreds of Comanche people on horseback, their colorful clothing and decorated horses creating a spectacle unlike anything Thomas had ever witnessed. Chief Running Bear rode forward alone until he was perhaps 50 yards from the house, then dismounted and stood beside his horse. For several moments, he simply looked at Thomas and his family standing on the porch, his expression unreadable. Then, the chief raised his voice and spoke in Comanche, his words carrying clearly across the distance between them. Thomas couldn't understand what was being said, but the tone was formal and ceremonial rather than threatening. When Chief Running Bear finished speaking, his son rode forward and dismounted beside his father. The boy looked directly at Thomas and began to translate his father's words into English. "My father, Chief Running Bear of the Quahada Comanche, greets the man who saved the life of his son," the boy called out. "He has brought our entire band to witness what happens when honor is met with honor, and when the courage to save a life is repaid with the respect it deserves." Thomas felt his knees go weak with relief. This was indeed a peaceful visit, but one that was clearly of tremendous importance to the Comanche people. He walked down from the porch and approached to within normal speaking distance of the chief and his son. "Tell your father that he and your people are welcome on my land," Thomas said. "And tell him that I am honored by his presence and by the presence of your entire band." The boy translated, and Chief Running Bear nodded approvingly. Then, the chief spoke again, at greater length this time. "My father says that our people have a custom," the boy explained. "When a great debt is owed, it must be repaid in a way that honors both the giver and the receiver. You saved the life of his only son, the future leader of our people. Such a debt cannot be repaid with gifts or horses or even gold. It can only be repaid with something of equal value." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "What does your father have in mind?" Chief Running Bear spoke again, and this time there was something almost ceremonial in his tone. "3 days ago, you risked your own safety to save a Comanche child," the boy translated. "You did this knowing that our peoples are enemies, knowing that helping us might bring danger to yourself and your family. You did it because you believe that a child's life has value beyond the conflicts between our peoples." The chief paused and gestured toward the hundreds of Comanche people spread out behind him. "Today, my father offers you and your family something no white man has ever been given, the protection and friendship of the Quahada Comanche. From this day forward, you and your descendants will be considered members of our extended family. Your ranch will be under our protection, and any who threaten you will face the wrath of our warriors." Thomas stared at the boy in amazement. "Your father is offering to adopt my family into your tribe?" "Not adoption exactly," the boy explained. "Something different. Something new. My father believes that the time may come when our peoples must learn to live together rather than fight. You have shown that such a thing is possible. He wants our people to remember this day, and he wants your people to know that honor exists among the Comanche just as it does among the white men." Chief Running Bear spoke again, and the boy's next words made Thomas's heart pound with the magnitude of what was being offered. "My father says that as long as the Quahada Comanche exist as a people, no harm will come to the McKenna family or their descendants. We will be bound together by the life that was saved and the honor that was shown. If you accept this bond, you will have the friendship of our people for all generations to come." Thomas looked back at Sarah and Mary, both of whom had followed him down from the porch and were listening in amazement to every word. This was beyond anything he could have imagined when he threw that rope to a drowning boy 3 days ago. "I don't know what to say," Thomas admitted. "This is far more than I expected or deserved." Chief Running Bear seemed to understand his hesitation even before the boy could translate. The chief spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. My father says that you must understand what this means, the boy explained. If you accept our protection and friendship, you will be bound to us as we will be bound to you. If our people are in need, you would be expected to help if you can. If we are wrongly accused of crimes we did not commit, you would be expected to speak for us. This is not just a reward for saving my life, it is an offer of true kinship between our families. Thomas realized that Chief Running Bear was asking him to become something unprecedented, a bridge between two worlds that had been at war for decades. The chief wasn't just expressing gratitude, he was making a political and social statement that could change the relationship between the Comanche and, at least some of the white settlers in Texas. I need to discuss this with my family, Thomas said. Such an important decision affects all of us. The boy translated, and Chief Running Bear nodded approvingly. My father says that a man who does not consult his family before making important decisions is not worthy of respect. Take the time you need. We will wait. Thomas returned to where Sarah and Mary stood, their faces reflecting the same mixture of amazement and uncertainty that he felt. This moment would determine not just their immediate future, but the legacy they would leave for generations to come. Thomas McKenna stood with his wife and daughter, acutely aware that hundreds of Comanche eyes were watching them during this crucial family discussion. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Never in the history of the Texas frontier had a white family been offered such an unprecedented alliance with one of the most powerful Indian tribes in the region. Thomas, do you understand what Chief Running Bear is really asking? Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. He's asking us to choose sides in a war that's been going on for decades. If we accept his offer, we'll be seen as Indian sympathizers by every white person in Texas. Mary, however, seemed less concerned about public opinion. Mama, he's offering us protection and friendship. After what happened to the Jenkinson family, shouldn't we be grateful that someone wants to keep us safe? It's more complicated than that, sweetheart, Thomas replied, his mind racing through the implications of Chief Running Bear's offer. If we accept, we'll be bound to help the Comanche when they need it. That could mean providing supplies, offering refuge, or even standing against our own neighbors if there's a conflict. But, Papa, Mary argued, isn't that what good neighbors do for each other anyway? Help when they can and stand up for what's right? Thomas looked back toward Chief Running Bear, who remained standing patiently beside his horse while the McKenna family deliberated. There was something deeply impressive about the chief's dignified bearing and his willingness to wait for their decision without pressure or intimidation. Sarah, what are you thinking? Thomas asked his wife. I know this isn't what either of us expected when I rode out to check on the cattle 3 days ago. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes moving from the chief to the hundreds of Comanche people spread across their property, then, back to her husband's face. I'm thinking about that boy drowning in the quicksand, she said finally. And, I'm thinking about what kind of people we want to be. What do you mean? Thomas, you risked your life to save a child you didn't know, from a people most folks around here consider enemies. That tells me something about your character, and it tells me something about the kind of man I married. Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts. If Chief Running Bear is offering us friendship and protection because he values that kind of character, then, maybe we should trust his judgment. Thomas felt a surge of love for his wife's wisdom and courage. And, what about the consequences? The other ranchers, the townspeople, even the territorial government, they're all going to see this as betrayal. Let them, Mary said with the fierce certainty of youth. If they can't understand that saving a child's life was the right thing to do, then, their opinions don't matter. Sarah nodded slowly. Your daughter's right, Thomas. We can't live our lives based on what frightened people might think. We have to base our decisions on what we know to be right. Thomas looked out at the remarkable scene before them, hundreds of Comanche people who had traveled here specifically to witness this moment. He realized that this decision would be remembered and talked about for generations, both among the Comanche and among the white settlers. The question was what kind of story it would be. "There's something else to consider," Thomas said. "Chief Running Bear isn't just making this offer to us personally. I think he's making a statement about the possibility of peace between our peoples. If we accept, we become living proof that whites and Indians can coexist with mutual respect. And if we refuse?" Sarah asked. "Then, we miss the chance to be part of something historic. We miss the chance to show that the frontier doesn't have to be a place where people kill each other because of the color of their skin or the culture they come from." Mary took her father's hand. "Papa, I think you already know what you want to do. You wouldn't have saved that boy if you didn't believe in treating all people with respect and kindness. This is just a bigger version of the same choice." Thomas squeezed his daughter's hand, marveling at her insight. She was right. Accepting Chief Running Bear's offer was simply an extension of the same moral principles that had driven him to throw a rope to a drowning child. "Are we all in agreement then?" Thomas asked, looking at both his wife and daughter. "Are we ready to accept Chief Running Bear's offer, knowing that it will change our lives in ways we can't predict?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "I'd rather face an uncertain future with honor than a predictable one built on fear and prejudice." "Absolutely," Mary added. "This is the most exciting thing that's ever happened in our family." Thomas walked back toward Chief Running Bear, aware that his next words would alter the course of history for both families. The chief watched his approach with patient dignity, his son standing ready to translate. "Chief Running Bear," Thomas began, his voice carrying clearly across the distance between them, "my family has discussed your generous offer, and we are honored to accept your friendship and protection. We pledge to you the same loyalty and respect that you have shown to us." The boy quickly translated Thomas's words, and Chief Running Bear's stern expression softened into what Thomas could only describe as a smile of deep satisfaction. The chief spoke at length, his voice carrying the weight of formal ceremony. "My father says that this day will be remembered by our people for as long as the Comanche exist as a nation," the boy translated. "He says that you have shown courage not just in saving my life, but in accepting the responsibilities that come with our friendship. From this day forward, the McKenna family will be under the protection of the Quahada Comanche, and the Quahada Comanche will have a home among the white settlers of Texas." Chief Running Bear then did something that took Thomas completely by surprise. The chief removed one of the eagle feathers from his hair and handed it to his son, who carried it to Thomas. "This feather belonged to my father's grandfather," the boy explained as he placed it in Thomas's hands. "It has been passed down through 4 generations of Comanche leaders. My father wants you to have it as a symbol of the bond between our families. As long as you carry this feather, any Comanche warrior will know that you are under our protection." Thomas accepted the feather with trembling hands, understanding the magnitude of the gift he had just received. This wasn't just a token of appreciation, it was a sacred object that connected him to the history and tradition of the Comanche people. Chief Running Bear spoke again, and this time his voice carried across the entire gathering so that every member of his tribe could hear his words. "My father is telling our people the story of what happened 3 days ago," the boy explained to Thomas. "He is telling them about your courage and honor, and he is explaining why this alliance is important for the future of both our peoples." Thomas listened to the chief's speech, understanding none of the Comanche words but hearing the passion and conviction in Running Bear's voice. When the chief finished, a remarkable thing happened. The entire gathering of Comanche people began to chant in unison, their voices rising and falling in a complex rhythm that seemed to connect earth and sky. "What are they saying?" Sarah asked, having approached to stand beside her husband. The boy's face glowed with pride as he translated. "They are chanting your names, the names of the McKenna family. They are promising to remember this day and to honor the alliance that has been made. In our tradition, when the entire tribe chants together like this, it becomes part of our oral history that will be passed down to future generations." The chanting continued for several minutes, growing in intensity until it seemed to Thomas that the very air around them vibrated with the power of hundreds of voices united in common purpose. When it finally ended, the silence that followed was profound and sacred. Chief Running Bear approached Thomas directly for the first time, extending his hand in the white man's custom of greeting. When Thomas took it, the chief's grip was firm and warm, conveying a sense of mutual respect that transcended cultural differences. The chief spoke once more, and his son translated with obvious emotion. "My father says that today two fathers have become brothers, united by their love for their children and their commitment to honor. He says that as long as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, the Comanche will remember Thomas McKenna as the man who saved a child's life and changed the future of two peoples." What followed was unlike anything Thomas could have imagined. Instead of simply departing, the Comanche people began to set up what appeared to be a temporary camp around the McKenna ranch. Women started preparing food, children began playing games in the yard, and warriors gathered in small groups to share stories with each other. "Are they staying?" Sarah asked in amazement. The boy overheard her question and smiled. "My father has declared this a day of celebration. Our entire tribe will camp here tonight to honor the alliance that has been made. Tomorrow, we will continue our journey to our winter grounds, but today belongs to friendship and new beginnings." Thomas found himself in the surreal position of hosting what was essentially a large-scale Indian powwow on his ranch property. Comanche women approached Sarah with gifts of beadwork and pottery, while children played with Mary as if cultural differences didn't exist. Warriors shared their weapons and hunting techniques with Thomas, treating him with the respect they would show a fellow tribesman. As the afternoon progressed, Thomas began to understand that something truly historic was taking place. This wasn't just a ceremony honoring his rescue of Chief Running Bear's son, it was the birth of a new kind of relationship between Indians and whites on the Texas frontier. The celebration continued into the evening, with storytelling, traditional dancing, and shared meals that brought the two cultures together in ways that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Thomas watched his wife and daughter interacting easily with Comanche women and children, and he realized that fear and prejudice had been replaced by curiosity and genuine friendship. Late that night, as the celebration began to wind down, Thomas found himself sitting by a campfire with Chief Running Bear and several other tribal leaders. Despite the language barrier, he felt a sense of brotherhood with these men that surprised him with its intensity. The chief's son served as translator for a conversation that Thomas would remember for the rest of his life. "My father wants you to know," the boy said, "that what has happened here today will spread to other tribes. The story of the white rancher who saved a Comanche child will be told around campfires throughout the southern plains. Some tribes will be curious about whether other whites might be worthy of trust and friendship." Thomas realized that the implications of his actions extended far beyond his own family and even beyond Chief Running Bear's tribe. He had potentially opened a door to peace negotiations that could affect thousands of people across the entire region. "Tell your father," Thomas replied, "that I hope other men, both white and Indian, will find the courage to choose friendship over fear. Today has shown me that we have more in common than we have differences." As Thomas finally retired to his house that night, leaving the Comanche camp spread across his property under the vast Texas stars, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed in just 3 days. He had begun the week as an ordinary rancher checking on his cattle. He was ending it as a bridge between two worlds, carrying the responsibility of representing the possibility of peace on a frontier that had known mostly war. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as word of the alliance spread throughout the county and beyond. But, tonight, Thomas McKenna fell asleep to the sound of Comanche lullabies being sung to children camped in his yard, and he knew that whatever came next, he had chosen the path of honor and human dignity over the easier road of fear and prejudice. Dawn came slowly to the McKenna ranch, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold as Thomas awoke to a sight that still seemed like a dream. Across his property, hundreds of Comanche people were breaking camp with the quiet efficiency of a people who had lived nomadically for generations. Smoke from dying campfires drifted lazily in the morning air, and the sound of horses being prepared for travel created a gentle hum of activity. Thomas dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Chief Running Bear waiting for him on the front porch. The chief had apparently been up for some time, and his expression carried the weight of important business that needed to be concluded before the tribe departed. The chief's son appeared at his father's side, ready as always to serve as translator for this final conversation between the two men who had become brothers through circumstance and choice. "My father wants to speak with you about what comes next," the boy began. "Yesterday was a day of celebration and ceremony, but today we must discuss practical matters." Thomas nodded, understanding that the euphoria of the previous day's events would now give way to the reality of living with the consequences of their alliance. Chief Running Bear spoke at length, his voice serious but not unfriendly. "My father says that word of what happened here will spread quickly among both your people and ours," the boy translated. "Some will see yesterday's ceremony as a betrayal of their own kind. Others will see it as an opportunity for peace. You must be prepared for both reactions." "I understand," Thomas replied. "I'm not naive about what we've started here. There will be people on both sides who want to destroy what we've built." Chief Running Bear nodded approvingly when this was translated, then continued speaking. "My father says that our alliance comes with both privileges and responsibilities," the boy explained. "As we promised, you and your family will always be under Comanche protection. Any warrior from any band who sees the eagle feather you carry will know that harming you would mean war with the Quahada Comanche." Thomas touched the sacred feather that now hung from a leather cord around his neck. The weight of it seemed much greater than its actual physical mass. "But," the boy continued translating, "this protection extends only to your immediate family and your property. My father cannot guarantee the safety of your neighbors or other white settlers. If they want Comanche friendship, they must earn it as you have done." "I understand the distinction," Thomas said. "What about my responsibilities to your people?" Chief Running Bear's expression grew more serious as he addressed this crucial question. "My father says that there may come times when our people need food, water, or shelter," the boy translated. "If such needs arise and you are able to help without endangering your own family, you will be expected to do so. This is what it means to be bound by kinship rather than merely by trade agreements." Thomas had anticipated this responsibility and was prepared for it. "Your father can count on my help when it's needed and when it's possible to give it." The chief smiled slightly at this response, then continued with what was clearly the most important part of their discussion. "My father says that someday, perhaps soon, there will be attempts to make peace between our peoples through official negotiations," the boy explained. "When that time comes, you may be called upon to speak for our character and our desire for honorable peace. Are you prepared to do this, even if it makes you unpopular among your own people?" Thomas realized that Chief Running Bear was asking him to potentially serve as a witness or advocate in future treaty negotiations. This was an enormous responsibility that could place him at odds with territorial authorities, military commanders, and his own neighbors. "Tell your father that I will always speak the truth about what I have seen and experienced," Thomas replied. "I cannot promise to agree with everything the Comanche people do, just as I don't agree with everything my own people do. But I will testify to the honor and humanity I have witnessed among your tribe." Chief Running Bear clasped Thomas's shoulder when this was translated, his gesture conveying deep satisfaction with this answer. Sarah and Mary emerged from the house, both of them looking somewhat overwhelmed by the magnitude of the changes in their lives. Sarah carried a basket of fresh biscuits, which she offered to the chief and his son. "Please tell Chief Running Bear that he and his people will always be welcome at our table," Sarah said to the boy. "Yesterday showed me that friendship knows no boundaries of race or culture." Mary stepped forward with the boldness that Thomas had come to expect from his daughter. "Will we see you again?" she asked the chief's son directly. The boy smiled at her directness. My father says that our paths will cross again many times. We travel through this area twice each year, in spring and fall. Unless war prevents it, we will always stop to visit our adopted family. As the conversation continued, Thomas became aware that other white settlers were approaching his property. He could see riders on the horizon, moving toward his ranch with obvious purpose. Given the events of the previous day, he suspected that news of the Comanche celebration had spread throughout the county. Chief Running Bear had also noticed the approaching riders, and he spoke quickly to his son before turning back to Thomas. My father says that our time for private conversation is ending, the boy translated. He wants you to know that what happens in the next few hours will test the strength of the alliance we made yesterday. Some of the men who are coming may try to force you to choose between your new Comanche brothers and your old white neighbors. What does he advise? Thomas asked. My father says that a man of honor cannot be forced to choose between right and wrong by threats or pressure, the boy replied. He says that if you remain true to the principles that drove you to save my life, you will make the right decisions. Chief Running Bear mounted his horse and signaled to his people that it was time to depart. The efficiency with which the entire camp was dismantled and packed was remarkable to watch. Within minutes, hundreds of people and horses were organized and ready to travel. Before leaving, the chief rode close to where Thomas stood with his family. He spoke once more, his voice carrying the formality of an official pronouncement. My father says that the alliance made between the McKenna family and the Quahada Comanche is now sealed by ceremony and witnessed by the spirits of our ancestors, the boy translated from horseback. He says that future generations will remember this day as the moment when peace became possible between our peoples. With that, Chief Running Bear raised his hand in farewell, and the entire Comanche column began moving away from the ranch. Thomas, Sarah, and Mary stood watching until the last rider disappeared over a distant ridge, leaving behind only the memory of an extraordinary day and the trampled grass where hundreds of horses had grazed. The approaching white riders arrived less than an hour after the Comanche departure. Thomas recognized most of them, neighboring ranchers, townspeople from Brazos City, and even Sheriff Watson. But, leading the group was Captain James Williams from Fort Richardson, accompanied by a dozen cavalry troopers. Captain Williams dismounted and approached Thomas with the rigid bearing of a career military officer who was clearly displeased with the situation he had been called to investigate. Mr. McKenna, Williams said without preamble, I've received reports that you harbored a large Comanche war party on your property and that you've entered into some kind of alliance with Chief Running Bear. I'm here to determine whether these reports constitute evidence of treason against the territorial government. Thomas felt his heart sink. He had hoped for more time before facing official scrutiny of his actions, but apparently word of the ceremony had reached military authorities faster than he expected. Captain Williams, Thomas replied calmly, I saved the life of a drowning child, and the child's father expressed his gratitude. I don't see how that constitutes treason. The reports I've received indicate that you accepted formal protection from a hostile Indian tribe and agreed to provide them with assistance when requested, Williams continued. If true, that would indeed constitute treasonous collaboration with enemies of the United States. Sheriff Watson stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable with the military officer's aggressive tone. Captain, I've known Tom McKenna for 15 years. He's as loyal an American as you'll find in this county. Maybe we should hear his side of the story before we start talking about treason. Jake Morrison, however, was less supportive. Tom, we warned you this would happen. You can't make deals with Indians and expect the rest of us to just accept it. Chief Running Bear's warriors have been raiding settlements for years. How do we know this isn't all some elaborate trap? Thomas realized that this moment had been inevitable from the instant he decided to pull a drowning boy from the quicksand. He could deny the alliance, minimize its importance, or try to explain it away. Or he could stand by his principles and accept the consequences. Captain Williams, Thomas said, his voice steady and clear, I saved the life of Chief Running Bear's son because it was the right thing to do. The chief offered his friendship and protection in return, and I accepted because I believe in treating all people with dignity and respect. If that constitutes treason in your opinion, then, I suppose I'm guilty as charged." A murmur ran through the assembled men, some expressing approval of Thomas's honesty and others clearly disturbed by what they saw as an admission of guilt. Captain Williams studied Thomas carefully before responding. "Mr. McKenna, I'm not here to arrest you for saving a child's life. But, I need to understand the exact nature of your agreement with Chief Running Bear. The military situation in this region is delicate, and unauthorized peace negotiations could interfere with official territorial policy." Thomas spent the next hour explaining in detail everything that had transpired over the past 4 days. He described the rescue, the ceremony, and the terms of the alliance as he understood them. He answered questions about Comanche numbers, weapons, and apparent intentions, while making it clear that he would not betray any information that might endanger his new allies. When Thomas finished his account, Captain Williams was quiet for several minutes, clearly wrestling with how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Mr. McKenna," Williams said finally, "I'm going to file a report stating that you prevented a potential hostage situation by rescuing Chief Running Bear's son, and that the chief's subsequent visit was a diplomatic gesture rather than a military threat. However, I'm also going to recommend that you avoid any further independent negotiations with Indian tribes. Such matters should be handled through proper military and territorial channels." Thomas recognized this as a face-saving compromise that allowed Williams to avoid taking action against a popular local citizen while still asserting military authority over Indian relations. Over the following months, the story of Thomas McKenna and Chief Running Bear spread throughout Texas and beyond. Newspaper reporters came to interview the rancher who had been adopted into a Comanche tribe. Government officials studied the alliance as a possible model for future Indian relations. And other settlers began to question whether the constant warfare on the frontier was truly inevitable. The most significant test of the alliance came the following spring, when drought conditions forced Chief Running Bear's tribe to request permission to water their horses at Willow Creek during their annual migration. Several neighboring ranchers objected, fearing that allowing Indians onto their land would encourage raids. But Thomas stood firm in his commitment to his Comanche brothers, and the watering was allowed to proceed peacefully. That summer brought news that would change the entire dynamic of the frontier. The Medicine Lodge Treaty was signed, establishing reservations for the Southern Plains tribes and officially ending the Indian wars in that region. Chief Running Bear was one of the signatories, and he specifically requested that Thomas McKenna be present as a witness to the negotiations. Standing in that treaty camp, watching his adopted Comanche brother sign an agreement that would fundamentally alter his people's way of life, Thomas understood that their alliance had indeed played a role in making peace possible. The friendship between a white rancher and a Comanche chief had demonstrated that trust and mutual respect could exist between peoples who had been enemies for generations. Years later, when historians wrote about the end of the Indian Wars in Texas, they would note that the Medicine Lodge Treaty was made possible partly by relationships like the one between Thomas McKenna and Chief Running Bear. The rescue of a drowning child had indeed changed the course of history, proving that individual acts of courage and compassion could have consequences far beyond anything their perpetrators might imagine. Thomas McKenna lived to be 78 years old, spending his final years telling his grandchildren about the day he saved a Comanche boy from quicksand and gained a brother in the process. The eagle feather that Chief Running Bear had given him remained one of his most treasured possessions, and it was passed down through generations of McKenna descendants who carried on the tradition of friendship with their adopted Comanche family. Chief Running Bear kept his promise as well. Until his death in 1889, he made regular visits to the McKenna Ranch, and the alliance between the two families remained strong through decades of change on the Texas frontier. The boy whose life Thomas had saved grew up to become Chief Little Eagle, a leader who worked tirelessly to build bridges between Indian and white communities throughout the late 19th century. The story of their friendship became a legend that was told around campfires and dinner tables for generations, a reminder that humanity knows no boundaries of race or culture, and that sometimes the most important moments in history begin with one person's simple decision to help another human being in need. In 1897, 30 years after the rescue at Willow Creek, the state of Texas erected a small monument at the site where it all began. The inscription read simply, "Here, compassion conquered fear, and friendship was born between peoples who had known only war." It stands there still, weathered by time but enduring like the legacy of the rancher who chose to save a child's life and changed the world in the process.